Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Costume Co. And today I am delighted. I have the most delightful guest, by the way. Her name is Safowa. Safowa, sorry, I already screwed it up. Safowa Bright Bitzelberger. And she is the costume designer for the Netflix series Griselda. I had the good luck, good fortune of being able to watch the entire show. It's fantastic. And I highly recommend everybody else do. So, Safowa, I'm sorry, I say I already blew your name at the beginning. Thank you so much for
Okay.
joining us.
Thank you, Heidi. And no worries about my name. It's a tricky one. So, it rhymes with
Um,
Kahlua, but even then, it's still a challenge. So,
yeah,
no
after you
worries.
told me that, I just totally bungled it. But anyway, I'm so glad you've made the time to talk to me about this
Yeah.
show, and absolutely love the costumes. So many articles I saw, actually, not even like ones where you're interviewed, but where people have just been raving about the fashions and like get this look and all that kind of thing. So that must be really kind of delightful to see the response from viewers and fans.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that we worked on it. We shot it a while ago. I think that it took a long time for it to get to camera and for them to get it to the point that they wanted. And then I think, especially because of the writer's strike, they really wanted to release it at the right time. And so it was such a pleasure. Even starting off and doing some of the PR, it refreshed my memory and it sort of brought me back to that time. And we spent so much time on the project and developing the looks that it's just wonderful to see how people have responded to it.
So before we get into the show and all the details and all the fun
Yes.
costumes, I was wondering, first of all, I want to say congratulations on the show, but would you mind telling everyone a little bit about yourself in case they don't know who you are?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I actually I studied fashion design, and I've always had a love for art and a love for design. As really, even as a very small child, I was the kid in the class that was drawing everyone's pictures, and and that's something I carried over into. It's been one line of continuity throughout my life, and so I found myself interested in. Uh, Originally architecture, and then I ended up focusing on apparel design when I really did go, graduate from high school. I sort of did not focus in architecture. I focused on apparel design and textiles, and that's what I went to university for. And I worked as an apparel designer for a number of years, all throughout my 20s. Not to date myself, but that's what I did. And I designed, trendy junior clothing and all types, junior and contemporary and kids clothing. And I ended up styling a number of photo shoots for one of the companies, one of the apparel design firms that I was working for. And I really liked it. I liked that element. And it was really gratifying seeing my designs on the models. And I also really enjoyed the immediacy of when I was in the apparel industry of illustrating something and it's not sample. Goes into a trunk. It goes to New York for for Market Week, and it sells. And you turn around and you have a warehouse filled with your clothing. And you go to a store and it's hanging. And it was something that I really love that element. And I also like the element of drawing something, having fabric, creating it, cutting it out, sewing it, it's hanging there. Like that's something that again has been this continuity throughout my life. And when I started styling and I found that I had an affinity for it, I ended up sort of lilting into that direction. One of the companies I worked for downsized and was actually gobbled up by a giant company. So they had a duplication in a number of positions and offered people an opportunity to take a break and get laid off. And I took that. And when I did, I ended up redirecting my energies to styling. And so I did that for a number of years, worked on many record labels, styling music videos. And then I sort of fell into film and TV. And that is where I really felt well suited. I love that. I loved how hands-on it was. And that's really where I got my start. I started off working on I really paid my dues too. And this is something that uh, was, you really took a little bite of humble pie, because I had gone to university for apparel design and I had worked in the industry and had a very, very decent career. And so I really had to step back and pivot. And I decided to kind of learn from the bottom up. And, there weren't many doors open for someone like me. And so I had to kind of create my own path. And that's what I did. And I stepped back and, like I said, took a bite of humble pie and paid my dues and worked on small projects. It's almost like each area within this field, if you pivot and redirect your energies, there's a point where you have to sort of start off at the bottom a little bit. And this is 20 years ago. It was a long time ago. But at the time, you don't feel that way. You feel like it's very discouraging because you've made a path already in something in an arena very similar. But TV and film is very different than apparel design. You're still dealing with clothes, and there is an overlap with building clothes and designing and illustrating and clothing fabrication. But then that's sort of where the similarities end. And the same thing with styling. There's a lot of, maybe someone has a great eye for styling, but it doesn't mean that they have an affinity for TV or film. And so that's something else that I had to learn. And I'm glad I learned from the bottom up. And so, yeah, I ended up shifting into television, and mainly in a lot of series and sitcoms, and all of those areas really teach you a great deal. Even working on multi-camera, old school sitcoms that there aren't as many. I think like Big Bang Theory, there's a few that have finally, that have ended up, ending after a number of years. And Big Bang Theory is one of the ones that ended, I'd say, in the last few years. And when you learn how to thrive in that environment, it's very unforgiving because you have an audience, and it again teaches you a great deal. So so that's how I started off.
Great. Well, there's a few things I was going to comment on. One,
Yes.
I've actually worked with designers who come from an architecture background.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially because my background is theater, so
Oh,
oftentimes, it'll be a set costume designer, and I find a lot of designers. I think maybe it uses a similar type of skill set, perhaps.
yes.
I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that.
I think spatially, yes. And I think that a dear friend who was the production designer on Griselda, Knut Lou, he is German, and we were talking. He's amazing, so talented, and he is part of the reason why Griselda looks so staggeringly amazing, as it was his vision as a whole. And we were discussing things, and he was saying that he has a background in architecture. Right. And it was something that I realized, oh, well, that's something I was interested in too. And we were discussing of how some of the things overlap. And even though it's apparel and structure and spatial, I think that it makes sense. Definitely.
And then the second thing I was going to comment on is, again, I've met a lot of designers that started out in music videos. So, and I guess maybe, I don't want to date us, but the height of the music video was really big in the 80s. Like, I was watching actually a documentary on in Canada we have Much Music, but you have what's the name of the oh my gosh, I've lost it. What's the name of the video show in the States that you
MTV?
MTV. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
MTV. So there was a documentary I was watching about that. And, so that sort of really changed a lot of people's paths perhaps. But
Definitely.
so regarding Griselda, like how did you get involved in that?
It's interesting. I was on it from the very beginning. We actually started prepping it in August of 2021. And we started shooting it in January of 2022. And I was initially brought on there as costume supervisor, which, if you're not familiar with the way that the costume designer, the costume department is structured is that because it's such a bear, you need kind of like a left and a right brain for it. And the costumes, there's the costume designer who focus on the creative. And then there's the costume supervisor who focuses on logistical, on budget, on clearing the path for the designer to really be able to focus on the creative. And I've worn both hats in the industry, and I was initially brought on for that. But our designer who was on it, she ended up leaving once we started shooting. And so they said, Safowa, we know you can do this because we know you've done this before. And it made great sense. And it was a lot to take on, because to do it midstream is a different task than being able to, and to switch hats kind of midstream.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very, very big project with all period and so much custom made and so much rentals and purchases, beautiful vintage pieces. It was a lot to take on, and not to even be able to press the pause button, kind of like this YouTube thing. So,
Yes.
so it really, it was something that was daunting, but I'm really glad that that they felt that they had the confidence in me, and that I pivoted. And I'm really fortunate to have had a great team around me that supported me and were like, "Go for it, Safowa. This is, and clear the path." So I'm really happy.
Did you have to say, listen, I need to think over the weekend about this, or did you say, no, I'm going to do it?
I
I'm doing it.
I initially said, what, because it's really hard. I think only supervisors really understand how much it's a really challenging job, even on an easy, or a show that seems easy, like a smaller production that's contemporary and doesn't, isn't as ambitious and isn't as big of a project as Griselda. But to switch midstream is really unheard of, and so my sane side said, no, I don't know who to hand this off to, right? Because if you switch gears, you need to be able to hand it off to someone who will be able to take over for you in that capacity. And
well, yeah, and then someone had to replace you, I guess, as well,
yes.
right?
And so it was really, I was like, oh no, and but I also, it was very important for me to be able to bring the vision that we had worked so hard on, to bring it to light, and to support the director, and to support our cast and Sophia. And so I thought about it overnight, and then when I woke up, I said, okay. And I was very fortunate that everyone around me said, well, this is what we'll do to make it happen. So it was daunting at first, but I'm glad I took it on. And yeah.
Well, so because of that, normally, if you were the designer from the beginning, you would have a particular process. So how was your process then? Like by having to pivot?
It was, there were a number of, what was challenging is that, and what I will say is that in this day and age, especially because I've been in this industry, I realize really a long time now, I can truly say 20 years, right? We've all seen how the industry has evolved, and we see that through the shows we watch. There's 6 episodes, right? Not 22. Mm-hmm. It's, I'd say the first thing I say when we put on a new show to my husband, I go, how many episodes are there, right? Because you almost know, like, how much am I going to get invested? How much energy do I put towards this? Versus there are very few shows that still even make anything over 18 or 15 episodes. I would say very, very few. And the few are leftovers that are probably going to end in the next few years. And so it is, it's definitely very challenging because you don't have as long of a season, even whether it's a limited series or a permanent series. You don't have as much prep time, and they also overlap. All of the people in the industry do, of course, know this. You cross board, which means that on years ago you would shoot episode 1 and then episode 2 and then episode 3, and it was rare that you would overlap in any capacity, but now you can end up shooting in one day scenes from episode 4, from episode 5, from episode 1, and the only thing that might dictate it is the location, that will shape it. And even if it means the actor, in one scene is crying over the deathbed of their husband, and their child, that's an adult. And then the scene that they shoot later, somehow it's when the child's being born. I mean, it can be challenging. And so that impacts your prep time. And so one of the things that we were really fortunate to have, and was unprecedented on Griselda, is an amazing amount of prep time. Originally, it was just supposed to be, I'd say, maybe 10 weeks or so, but they ended up pushing it a little bit schedule-wise. They were retooling some of the scripts and schedule availability. And so we ended up, instead of starting to shoot in November of that year, we didn't shoot until January. And so what we were fortunate to do is part of our team that had started already, which was myself and the designer, we stayed, and we were able to really focus on prepping and pulling images and getting centered, which is a gift. And so when I pivoted and changed hats, we were shooting at the time, so that wasn't possible in many ways, but because I was able to, I almost feel like I was working 7 days a week at one stage in many ways. And I focused on telling how I would navigate telling the story of this jump forward into the 80s and midstream. And we were still shooting a great deal of the previous decade. And so it was a testament to the research we had in place, but more importantly, the research that I was able to do on my own, but really with my team, and kind of catch up and land in the place that we needed to. And so we could pull in amazing pieces, which we did. I mean, it was like rack after rack after rack of these pristine, beautiful vintage pieces that you can't believe still exist. And many of them were rentals, and many were purchases, pristine, gorgeous purchases from whole closets. We had an amazing company that we worked with named Torso Vintage. They're up in San Francisco, and he had such great connections. He would get the whole closet of someone's estate, and you would just look at it and go, oh my gosh, and it was extra interesting to see what one person purchased and how their taste level and eye carried through their whole closet and carried through different decades. It's a really amazing, like a gift.
Well, maybe that's a great place to go from, because one of the things I was wondering about, how did you approach your research? We have these mood boards we can show in a bit, but
Yeah.
where did you turn to for inspiration? What designers did you look at? I was reading a little bit about the show and some of the designers, like Halston, for instance, that you turned to. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the research process in general, for across the board started, it was everything. It was sort of no holds barred. So whether it was a stream of movies from the 70s or 80s and TV shows, but it was also periodicals, it was newspapers, it was fashion magazines, it was catalogs. Those are exceptionally helpful. It was yearbooks. It was everything from each time period. And that's really what gave you that sort of gritty reality, that it wasn't like what we remember the time period to be, if that makes sense. And someone who, because I think our memories tend to be very selective. And of course, if you say, show me something that's iconographic from the 80s, you immediately think of like Madonna, or you think of pastel colors, or you think of Miami Vice. But of course, it was everything much more than that. And it's also the time leading up to it, because a period, clothing wise, is, even when it's tied to automobiles or architecture, some things turn over more quickly, like fashion, right? Some things turn over more slowly, like car styles or architecture. And so even though fashion turns period wise much more quickly than the items I just listed, it isn't as it isn't as simplistic as when you just think of, oh, I'm just going to put someone in some crazy Devo glasses and, and an aquamarine shirt and something that's just iconographically appropriate for that time period. Same thing with the 70s. I think when people think of the 70s, many times they just think of disco. It's much more than that, obviously. Right. And it's the time leading. And what portion of the 70s? Is it the early 70s? Is the latter part? And so definitely, I mean, the research was endless. And like I mentioned, even something as mundane and pedestrian as a Sears catalog, or a yearbook, or a newspaper, so you could look and see the people in the background, right? I think that all of those things, in addition to the movies from each time period, it was exceptionally helpful. And I think that's what allowed us to represent Miami during that time period and have it not look like a caricature. I think it didn't look campy. It looked real. It looked gritty. It was great. And I think that a great deal of work went into that. And a huge part of that is even my team that took care of background, all the extras, and how much energy was put into the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of extras that we dressed, and the amount of curation that went into that, head to toe. We had so much stock that we brought in from across the country. One of the challenges when you're shooting a period project, not quite sure how it happens, but you find that there's 4 or 5 projects locally that are all shooting the same time period, and you're like, oh no, this is
wow.
shooting 70s too. And you would go to the boutiques or the rental houses and look, and another project has racks and racks on hold. You can't touch them, right? And it was tough because that meant everyone was sort of vying for the same pieces across the board. And so we really had to throw a wide net out. And we had really gifted shoppers that actually started off across the country, and they were from LA, but one happened to be out of town visiting family. And so we said, well, do you want to start a day early? And so we were able to do that. And we had boxes and boxes and boxes landing each time, our producer gulping and saying, oh my gosh, but I think that it's what really allowed us to have such an amazing pool to pull from. And we used it almost like our own mini costume house, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So first off, I want to say I watched part of the show with my husband, and I turned to him at one point and I said, you were talking about the production design, the costume design. I said, you really feel it. Like, I haven't been to Miami. My brother lived in Miami, but like, just even from my own personal experience of growing up in the 70s and 80s in Toronto, Canada, I was like, this looks so familiar to me. Like, I found like that with Stranger Things. I found like that's
Yeah.
how I would have dressed in the
Yes.
80s in high
Yes.
school. So
Yeah.
I really felt it. And like you say, it wasn't like a caricature of
Yes.
what someone in the 70s or 80s, like the diva glasses that you
Yeah.
so I truly, truly appreciated that. And also you showed the different you've got the different classes of people too, and the
Yes.
different cultures of people. So that was
Yes.
really, really fascinating as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
now, so I have a question. I think you were sort of touching on it. So how long did you like? You had quite an extensive amount of time to prepare. So like several months, it sounds like, which
Yes.
is unusual.
Yeah, which is more than we thought we were going to have. And so we
Mhm,
were like,
mhm,
okay, right? And we
mhm,
took advantage of it because it really, I'm sure if you threw out a questionnaire across the industry, I'd say one of the challenges is everything has become very compressed. So not just the amount of, so obviously if you're only shooting 6 or 8 episodes of a show now as a typical amount, right?
mhm.
And
Definitely.
then you're also overlapping and shooting multiple at the time. That even compresses the time more. And so it impacts, that you have less time to prep. And so
Mhm,
we took advantage of it. We were grateful for it. And I'd say that every single second of that time was appreciated. And I think that you see that on the screen, and that carries over in all other departments too. But I know that, I think that was very important, and obviously to show, um, to have it represent each level within that community appropriately. And even as we see, Griselda herself, as well as her contemporaries or her team around her,
mhm. Yeah.
um, from Dario, her husband, to Carmen, to all of these people that benefit from the staggering success of her drug cartel, right? I mean, I think that, um, in some of the research that we did, it clearly stated that the level at which she had reached in the 80s was in the billions, and that's something that even now it takes a lot to impress us, right? These days when we hear
Mhm,
numbers, we go a million, oh, okay, like that's a lot of money, but when you hear billions, you still say, ooh. And so to have it, to have her business be at that level financially and that much power, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. And so when we thought of how are we going to pop forward and jump forward and tell this story and show very quickly, because of how the episodes are set up, in episode 5, we jump forward and need to open up with showing she has landed. She is now where she had been clawing her way, um, you know, through all of these men, right? And the misogyny, how she had to keep getting up and really fight her way to the top. And so, in a relatively short period of time, from 78 to 83, 5 years, she builds this empire. She had her hands in every element within the city, real estate in politicians' pockets, obviously in the drug cartel. And she was such an astute businesswoman that, when we needed to figure out a way to represent that, it was really tempting, um, for me to just turn and say, like, okay, this is my chance to have every designer piece that I've fantasized about. And
mhm.
we did. I mean, we had, Dior and YSL and, oh my gosh, Escada and so many
Mhm. Oh, and
designers.
Diane von Furstenberg, I noticed,
Diane von
the wrap
Furstenberg, which
dresses.
was very, very, we definitely had
I love
that
the
in the
dresses, yeah.
70s. And we
And
also,
Halston, I think you had Halston as
yes,
well in the
Halston,
70s? Yes.
and also good catch, and also,
Did you have Pierre
you know,
Cardin by any chance? It's one of my
pardon?
favorite designers. Pierre Cardin, did you have Pierre
Pierre,
Cardin?
Pierre got in for some of the men, definitely,
Mhm,
definitely, and across the board for both periods, because it was, as I know you watched it, such an action heavy project, and that we you know, to find a pristine, gorgeous vintage piece is already extremely fortunate and lucky, but to find anything in quantity is pretty much unheard of. And even with
Mhm.
the really wide net that we sent out, we were able to actually procure, we still were able to procure a number of vintage pieces that we had many of, like some shirts that we found 4 or 5 of, but in
Oh,
general, it was
okay.
a rarity. And we would sort of reverse engineer around them, right? Like it wasn't always the style or exactly what we wanted, but we would find a home for it. And we would say, let's use it on this person or this stunt double. But in general, what we did in order to control the aesthetics and the design and the color and the fit and all of these things, which all those stars have to align if you're looking for vintage, right? Like just because you need a leather jacket from 1982 or from that time period does not mean that if you go to a 10 vintage shops, it'll be there. Doesn't. It's a lot of it is luck. That's why
Mhm.
rental houses are so useful, but you can't damage, you know, a beautiful rental. You can't. And even if they do have 5 of them, which many of them do have multiples, you can't damage it because they want it back and they want to be able
Yeah.
to kind of give it over to another project. And guess what? It wouldn't be available for us to use if another person had damaged it, if another production. And so you really have
Unless
to
you're
look at
James
those.
Cameron. I don't know if you know that story about
Yeah.
Titanic.
Yes.
Isn't that
Unless you're
crazy?
James Cameron or,
Unless
you
James
know,
Cameron.
there are a few, and occasionally something will get damaged, but you
Well, yeah, but
definitely
not on
can't.
purpose. Yeah.
No, not on
So
purpose. And
did you build the duplicates then?
so much
Like,
custom made.
oh yeah.
So much custom made. And
And
what we
that's
would do
really
is
hard too and challenging.
challenging, but we were really fortunate to have a
Oh, good.
exceptionally gifted workroom. And um, our head of workroom, Joanne Trotta, she's so gifted. And we had an endless amount of sewers, cutters and sewers, and um, building all of these amazing pieces. And we would, you know, the good thing that it affords you when you build something made to order, bespoke, is that you can control all the elements, right? You can control the color and the texture and everything and the size, and you can make 20 of them. It was challenging because the fabrications are a little different. And so we were fortunate again to have really gifted costumers and made to order costumers that were able to procure and throw that net out, find vintage fabrics or fabrics that really were very similar to what they had during that time. We even
Mhm.
had a number of times, and for specifically for one of the characters, Ribby, if he was her sort of sidekick towards
He's
the
my
end.
favorite.
He's
It
amazing. He wears clothes so
I
well.
love him, and I wanna see him in, like, a romantic comedy. I just would love to see he's so sexy, and I would just love to see him, like, I
He
love
is.
yeah. I won't give any
He is.
spoilers away for the
He's
phone
very
conversation we
sexy.
did.
No, really. He is everything that you can imagine, Heidi.
Yeah.
And he's also lovely and sweet and
Oh, I love hearing that.
talented. As was all the cast. Was
Mhm.
We were so fortunate. I mean, I remember just one fitting after another, especially when I pivoted and switched roles. Um, I was able to sort of you know uh, sort of see things from a different perspective. And I just was reminded about how fortunate we were from the top, from all sides of our cast. We're amazing and
Mhm.
really just great and wonderful to work with and passionate. And it did start from the top. Sophia was amazing. I mean, she was so passionate about becoming Griselda and dedicated so much energy to that role and really enveloping herself in the character that, when we were talking about how she would evolve as she moved forward and she lands and now she's at the pinnacle of her power and success with, all the money anyone could ever need, right, at her disposal. She and I beautiful, such ideas to put her in every designer piece. We realized, and she said, like, she's that wasn't about it for her. Like, it wasn't, it was about power. That's what
Mhm.
was important. Now with power, you get a beautiful home and you have money, and you with money, you get power and freedom and
Mhm.
security and all these other things. But it wasn't about, this is the dress that I've been wanting to wear. This is the designer that I couldn't wait to have. And so we had to figure out a way to, of course, immediately allow you to know that it was the 80s, structure wise, silhouette wise, fabrication wise, but not have it be so in your face. So I avoided putting her in the, extremely embellished pieces that maybe you would think of when you think of, first of all, that represent wealth and, money, like Dynasty, right? So we stayed away from that direction of
Mhm.
the Dynasty and the Dallas. We did not want that. We didn't want it to detract, especially because of those intense scenes that we see her in, even in like in episode 5, right? And how she
Mhm.
sort of, during the party, comes undone, right? And it's because
Yes,
of
that is an understatement.
drugs.
Yeah.
Because of the drugs, because of the
Mhm.
paranoia, because that's also, she's reached this level, but actually now she's still looking behind her all the time,
Mhm.
right? And there's someone always trying to bring you down when you reach the top, no matter if you're in a legitimate, field or not. And there's just more at stake, probably, right? And so really, when I was thinking even of how we anticipated that the shots would be set up, I knew that what we didn't want and what I didn't want was to see these shots of her, these passionate scenes where what we're seeing is beads flinging around and embellishment that's distracting from the actual performance. And so a lot of thought actually went into what we even would select for that episode and for those scenes. And it was worn over, even though we had many, many, many copies of that dress made, it needed to be able to be moved. As you know, it was very physical.
Mhm.
Many physical scenes that she was in. There were stunt doubles, or stunt double, a great deal of physicality, fight scenes. So many things were asked of a dress. And if you think of a dress that you might dress up in, I don't know if that's something that we could add to the list of something that needs to be accomplished when you're wearing a gown. So
Mhm.
so
Absolutely. I
it
was
was
gonna
it
ask
was
you.
great. It survived, and it was actually a really great decision, and so much thought went into it. But and it I love the way that it reflects in the light too, because it's this sound makes me sound like a costume nerd, but it's a cross woven fabric. It's like a plissé lame, so it's a pleated lame. It has threads going in 2 different directions in like a teal color as well as gold, and that's what gives it its reflective quality and makes it look like it's beaded, but it's not. And
Mhm.
I was
I was
really
gonna
pleased.
say, one of the things that really delighted me compared to some of the shows we're seeing lately is, and
Mhm.
I don't know if they did this,
Yeah,
but everything seems to be like really bright, like the lighting, the
yeah,
exterior shots, like as I'm sure a lot of the new shows recently, they love using color filters and draining
yeah.
all the color, but this had a lot of color. Do you mind if I show some pictures while we're talking about
Sure,
it?
definitely. Yes, please.
So and you can just explain it as we go along. So for
Yes,
instance, like this one, you have that real pop of cobalt blue, even though it's an
yes.
interior scene. And as you
Mhm.
mentioned, you can see Griselda, you can see the shimmer, in her
Yes,
gown. Did you want to talk a little bit
yes,
about the
yes.
party?
Yeah, that's the party. That's an
Mhm.
interior in her mansion, that was set in Miami. And you did mention that, I don't I know this has been, definitely in a number of articles, but so I don't feel like I'm giving away anything that people don't know, but we shot, everything in Long Beach. And
Mhm.
it worked so well for Miami, and I do believe they might have shot some exteriors in Miami, but in general, it was all shot in Long Beach, and we had this gorgeous, gorgeous waterside mansion that played as Griselda's mansion, and it was really exquisite in the way that it was decorated by our set decorator Kim Leonard, and of course, everything else too is just exquisite. And so this is a great shot because it was very important to me to get a little bit of that really iconographic 80s vibe out of my system. And Marta, who's standing across from her, Marta Ochoa, well, she is gorgeous and sweet, and also just wears clothes so well and was playful and fun. And her character is from this drug cartel family. So she always had money. She never struggled. She loved designer pieces and, lived her life in an exceptionally dangerous, as we know, and cavalier fashion. And she had everything at her disposal. And so it wasn't a big deal for her to throw on a designer piece. And if it got damaged or she ripped it off halfway through the night, no big deal. And so we just tried so many pieces on her, one after the other. And it was a really hard decision. But because once we knew what we were going to go with for Griselda and who she was going to be obviously coming to contact with, it really directed us and gave us direction on what we were going to select for everybody else. And it dictated that. And
yeah, the actress who plays Marta, she kind of reminds me a bit of Natalie Wood, like a young Natalie Wood. Yeah.
Yes.
She's got that sort of classic beauty.
Yes, you
to
are
her.
right.
Yeah, I was surprised actually at the relationship that these two developed. I was like, okay, where did that come from? That's kind of crazy.
Yes. I mean, I think that I know that was exciting, and it was a great storyline. And I think that it is interesting, the relationship that she developed with her. And I think that even where Griselda was in her life at that time, I think that because of where she, the power she attained and the level she attained, and again, I'm going to say like a relatively short time, I think that with that, it took so much work on her part, and then also left her in such a place of paranoia. And it's not just because of the drugs she was doing. I think that it's also, she just felt like she couldn't trust anyone. And,
she probably
and so
wasn't too far off on that. She had
Hmm?
a reason really not to be able to trust anybody. I mean, except for, I was going to show this picture of Dario.
Oh, yes. And yeah, you can really
here's
see
her dress. You can really, like, compared to here, you can really see that it's sort of like is it crinkled, like a crinkled silk?
Yeah, it's like a pleated. It's such an unusual, it's such a gorgeous fabric because it's airy but has a weight to it. It was so perfect for this silhouette and with the draping. And it was that dress was something that I really it's one of those pieces that you wanted to keep adding to. I had wanted to put, some beaded embellishment and applique at the drape, at the waist, and, I really had to dial myself back because I knew that I really didn't want it to become distracting or, caricaturist, especially because I knew what was to come from reading the script and what she was going to she was going to go through the party. And I just felt that it would have been distracting. But that's why the fabric was so important. And it was almost like a lot of pressure to put on the fabric, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And also with that necklace, it feels to me like an Egyptian. It has like a bit of an Egyptian feel, which of course was really big in the 80s, right? That Egyptian
And we wanted
common
something
sort of thing.
to it. Absolutely. Yeah. And she liked those Omega style necklaces too.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure. And then of course this becomes sort of a plot point. I don't know if it's the same necklace with the emeralds, but the other thing is the men are almost as beautifully dressed, compared to 2024, men tend to be very, I don't know how to describe it, very simple compared to the men dressed sort of like the 18th century. The men dressed just as beautifully as the women dressed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I think that, especially for that decade, and
Mhm.
I mean, I think that, I don't know, the 70s was great too.
It
And the
was.
90s, I don't know, that 90s were great too in their
Yeah.
own way. But I think that specifically for this decade, and one of the challenges that I was faced with was how do you interpret what someone's look was in one decade, right?
Mhm.
How are they going to translate? How is that going to evolve into the next one? What are they going to do with the money that they have if they're making more money? So, for example, um, you know, both of them had the same money, right? And the only difference, they had just as much money in the 70s, maybe more now because of Griselda. And I think the biggest difference in here is that the power level shifted a little bit, right?
Mhm.
So for them to be attending her party that she was having for Dario, I think there was a great deal of symbolism tied to that. And, so that's one thing. But everyone else, whether it was Dario or Rivi, or Carmen, especially Carmen,
Yeah,
she's
here's,
someone, just a good
mhm.
example. So you got to see how they interpreted their style and what they did with their money. And an interesting point with Carmen is that she really is someone who we realized, not only did she give in on her ethics to stick with Griselda, right? Because she was the
Mhm.
one at the beginning that was like, no, you're not doing this over here. You're not bringing this into my business. But unfortunately, and even though she had sort of established this new life for herself, which was a modest life, but straight and narrow, unfortunately, the draw of a different lifestyle and the financial opportunities that that she would have staying alongside Griselda is really what drew her into that life. And so we were able to see, what is it? Oh, she's driving a Porsche. Oh, she has this house that's on the water. And
Mhm.
I think that she has a better accessory. What is she doing with her jewelry? And so when we were deciding what she would wear for this party, we decided to skew it. First of all, slacks definitely versus dress. And this is another thing is that she, she was saying how she really wanted to feel like she's always working, right? Because that was, even
Mhm.
though she had given in to her ethics in order to align herself and stick with Griselda, despite the path she was going down, she really wanted to sort of maintain that, well, she still was really there to help her and to be the voice of reason, right? Which is what
Mhm.
we see her doing during the party, obviously, or attempting to. And so that's why we didn't choose her to be in anything like overly ornate. We went with the darker tone. And she wanted to feel different than the rest of the guests who were in, really embellished dresses and very sexy silhouettes and showing a lot of skin. She did not want to do that at all. And so that's why we really went with this is actually a custom made piece, head to toe, because we had to have enough for the stunt double for
Oh,
the fight
okay.
scene.
Yeah.
And
Is this by the way, is this exterior, is it shot at the mansion as well?
it is,
It
yeah.
Oh, so you got to do it all in one location, that's great.
Yes, it was a sprawling location and really an
Looks
amazing
beautiful.
property that, yeah,
You
it
know
was
what's
gorgeous.
funny? What I love here is standing behind Rivi is this woman wearing like a looks like a denim bustier, and she's got pink
Yeah,
or like
that's,
lavender lace gloves, maybe a leather
yeah,
skirt. I
yes,
love that contrast.
that's Dixon's girlfriend.
Oh, okay, okay. And then like the girls, like for instance, I love this butterfly top.
Oh, yes.
I've seen that in so many vintage
I
stores.
know.
The
I know,
butterfly
and that's
top.
something that we brought in that was actually a vintage piece, but we were
Mhm,
laughing because they also, again, it's one of those pieces that it's what as a good example of these pieces that are repros, like reproductions of vintage pieces that are still actually popular now. And so
mhm,
we, for her, that was a vintage piece, the little aquamarine butterfly top. Originally, the look that had been selected ended up being more casual of a direction than the director wanted and what we wanted. And so we really brought everyone up another notch. What had been decided earlier months before, we ended up changing. And I was really happy with that. So yes, so we had the great little shimmery satin disco knit pants, and then that's Carol G
Love them.
next to her. That's another look that we tweaked at the last moment and changed what had been. And that's the thing, sometimes if you're able to fit people months before, when you do get to it, they might change their mind. And so
Okay,
it was
that's
great
an
that we
interesting, yeah.
it was
One of the
great
things
that let me see it, but
Oh, sorry, I didn't interrupt you. I was going to say one of the things, obviously, I'm just going back to this because there's so many great accessories like the glasses, which I always
yes,
love glasses, period glasses, the jewelry, the
yes,
rings, the bracelets, the cuffs, the
yes,
armbands, like all
yes,
the shoes, like all those things,
yes.
right? That really, really lends to that feeling that you're there.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think I mentioned that the amount of care and curation that my crew did, it was amazing, and the attention to detail. And I was really fortunate to have an amazing team across the board, my assistant designers, as well as um, you know, but in addition to that, and great shoppers. But I was fortunate to have two really dedicated background key costumers who really took care of things start to finish. And we pretty much, we had to pre-fit all of the background because
Mhm.
it's just too much to do the day of. I mean, you can fill in
Oh,
a few
yeah.
people if someone shows up. You can, of course, dress them head to toe and you have everything at your disposal. But if you're talking about, 150 or 200 people, you must do prefits with them because it's not possible to dress people head to toe because no one's going to have, vintage pieces. Even if you're doing a contemporary project, it's still challenging to hope that people will have and bring with them what you'd like them to dress in. But usually they'll have a great pair of shoes or maybe,
Hmm.
let's say, a pair of slacks if it's a contemporary. But when it's vintage and when it's period, they're not going to have, the
No.
appropriate pieces that you like. And so the amount of work that goes into that and being able to project out, fit them early enough, make sure you have everything organized, and that way things run so smoothly. And that's a lot of the logistics that you kind of take for granted, and you just need to run smoothly. And so I was really fortunate to have two really exceptional key costumers, Janine McKiernan and Raina Mitchell. They were the background keys, and they sort of headed that whole division within my crew, and they were exceptional, really, really exceptional.
Amazing.
Yeah, start to
Um,
finish, they were great.
I I have a few more pictures just from
Oh
Netflix
yeah,
that I was going to share, and then we can I can show the wide picture if that's okay.
yes, yes,
So this one, I mentioned this dress earlier. I absolutely love this
yes.
dress. Maybe
I
like
know.
it looks like a Jessica McClintock, but probably quite a bit higher end than that, right?
Yes, it is. And that was actually a purchase piece that we knocked off because we needed to make sure that we had a backup. Even though we had, it's hard to explain, but yes, it is, but it was based on a vintage piece. And that's another great piece that we were, we knew that we're going to open up the episode with a bang where we sort of reveal like where she's landed. Oh my God,
Hmm.
she's actually in the throne now compared to her being like literally behind the velvet rope, right?
Hmm.
Waiting to
Yep.
speak with, Amilcar, right? Who had been at the head of things prior to this episode, and
Was it here?
trying over and over again.
It's
But
done
it
from
does
but
show
it's
the
it's great.
texture
It
of the
shows the
dress.
detail of her gown.
It does show the detail, but this was interesting because we initially it was discussed that a white power suit, Bianca
Mm.
Jagger, huge shoulder, white power suit, or maybe Annie Lennox vibe, right? Eurythmics, like
Mhm.
you know, And we were thinking, okay, and that's what we started sort of throwing the net out. Do we want that? And it's actually, I think it might even be on one of the concept boards that that we had included at one stage.
Was
And
it this one?
yeah, yes, perfect. Okay, so we had discussed that. See the white power suit. Good find, Heidi. But yeah, so that was one of the things we
Well,
discussed.
I knew Bianca Jagger. I knew that was her.
I see. I knew you knew.
And that, oh my
But
gosh,
thank you.
that
That
lace
was.
dress there.
I know,
Uh,
it's freaking amazing. Like,
yeah.
and this is a good example of how we come up with the concepts, right? And we just bring image after image and tear sheet after tear sheet and searching. And, you know, one of the beautiful things about, and actual books too, right? Like now we just search the internet. And one of the challenges is that you know, when you search the internet, the first images you get are the same ones everyone else gets. And you really, so you really have to deep dive. You can't just spend 20 minutes. And a lot of it, you are going down the rabbit hole because one site brings you to another site, brings you to another site. And so in addition to obviously taking the endless amount of time that it really, really does take to do online research, I think people think that it's something you really can do in a very short time. Even building boards is very time consuming. And especially because they get shot out to so many people. You're in, you know, the days of you presenting these boards for the first time, right? For people to see the first time, and that you have control over them. You have control over the images and how you even choose to tell the story when you're presenting a board. You really lose that control when you email it off, but it's absolutely necessary, or you make it available on, you know, as a Google Doc, you know, and or, you know, and Dropbox. And so it really impacts how you build the concept boards. And you really have to learn not to have an image in there that you don't want, or if it takes too much explaining, you may choose to not even have it in there, because ironically, that's the one that someone will be drawn to and say like, well, why is that in there? And you might
Oh,
say,
that's
oh, it's because
interesting.
I wanted you to see the shoulders on this, you know? And so,
Yeah. I have seen some
but
designers, what they
yes,
do is they crop it. They'll crop it on a
yes,
mood board.
exactly.
Like
So
if they don't want the focus, like say on a mon there, but that's a
yeah,
mon.
yeah,
It's stunning. Like say you go, okay, I want you just to see these shoulder pads. I don't want you to see. They'll
exactly,
just do a little
exactly.
zoom in on that.
Or they'll
You
zoom
do
in
have
and,
Alexa.
you
You
know,
do have Alexa Carrington there. Is that Alexa or is
yes, we
that just
do.
Joan
She
Collins?
she was there, and trust me, there are a lot. There actually were a lot of images of lovely
Sure.
Alexis,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. You know, I needed it to be easily recognizable that it was the '80s, and easily recognizable that she was in a position of power, and easily recognizable that that she's reached another pinnacle in her, you know, in her path.
Mm.
And but
The
when
one
and
thing I
it
want to
was
say about
tempting.
the one thing I wanted to say about the white as well, I always think of white as being quite extravagant. You know, like a wedding gown. And they used to say
Yes,
that the wealthy would wear a white wedding gown because, you know, you could stain it or spill something on it. And, you know,
yes,
then they're like, but I'm wealthy, so it doesn't matter. So I kind of do love the idea. Like she has another white, I don't know if it's on this here. Oh yeah, there.
oh
Is it
yeah,
okay
the
if I show
suit,
this?
yeah,
Yeah.
on
So the
the
suit on the
end,
far right.
yeah.
And so it feels like, first of all, I guess it's like, tell me what it is about the white to you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, one of the things is actually you nailed it. I mean, I
Mhm,
think that the reason that um obviously the color palette that we work with, you know, in the previous time period is very different than the '80s, right? Much more
mhm.
earth toned, warmer, and but it also, in many ways, it really was about Griselda being hands on. You know, when she landed in Miami from Colombia, she really only had like barely what she threw into the suitcases in a scrambling rush. She had her children, she had the brick of cocaine, some jewelry, very little. And she had to rebuild her life. She had to put clothes on that she really would probably not have worn. And although when she left Colombia, she was certainly not at the level financially that she reached in the '80s with her own cartel, but she was more wealthy. She, you know, she was the wife of someone who had a great deal of money and who was running his own drug business. And so um when we jump forward, or as we see her land in Miami, and time after time, she has to claw her way, figuratively and literally, up. She obviously had connections to a far more superior product, and all of these men's within the Miami drug scene knew this, but they did not believe, obviously, that a woman could run this company and run it, and run that type of business. And so she had to prove herself, as we know, over and over. And so she really did have to literally get her hands dirty, and she had to prove to them. And the biggest difference that we wanted to reflect as we jump forward in time is that she doesn't have to do that. She has a team. She has Rivi and all of the people under Rivi that do that, including poor Chucho, right? And who do also get their hands dirty, and not just dirty, then covered in blood. And so we chose to go with, I felt the white was a great option. And it's what we leaned into, because it immediately made her feel untouchable. And that's the feel that we wanted when she was sitting on the couch. And even though she's in a dress, not a power suit, she's not trying to be a man, because she'll never be a man. She's a woman, and she's exceptionally powerful, and it had even more impact. And not to get too theoretical, but that definitely, you nailed it. And yeah.
Well, I was thinking about, there's that one scene that she does decide, I am going to do this myself. I'm going to cut this guy's head off, right? And then she chickens out. Well, I don't want to say chicken out, but she decides to just shoot him. And then she walks into the house after, and then there's blood all over her shoes, which I love. What did you think of that? What did you think of that? And how did that all work out? Like, I mean, just dealing with blood must just be crazy.
Well, it was scripted, so we knew that was another. We knew from the get-go that it was needed to be on her shoes, so that impacted what shoes we selected, right? Because we couldn't use a one-of-a-kind piece, or more importantly, a rental that that we would damage, because again, you just don't want to do that to the rental houses, right? And so I do believe we had shoes. I mean, we had everything made. We have footwear made. We had jewelry created and made in multiple. And so in that case, that was the dialogue that we had with the director, to find out exactly how much blood he wanted on the shoe. And we have our own fake blood, but we also work with the makeup department, so the blood matches. And we have someone that's, splashes it on the shoe and let it dry, and all of those things. So you kind of reverse engineer into it. And I think in that case we had a blood covered shoe and a non-blood covered shoe. So
okay. Yeah. We don't have too much time. So what I was wondering is, do you want to talk a little bit about the emerald necklaces? How do you feel about that? Can I bring that up?
I mean, I think
so that this is something you sent to me.
This was interesting, because this was something that was added in the script later on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so it was always the discussion about the emerald earrings, which, if you look on this page, right there in the center upper area, you see two earrings facing each other with a black background. So those were created. A lot of R&D went into that, and those were created. And that's what she wore earlier on in, let's call it, in the season, in the series. And it had been scripted and discussed that she had an emerald necklace, but what we ended up doing was going with a different style necklace that she wore again earlier on. And so what we had to do is, once they decided that they really wanted this poignant scene of Griselda, I think in 106, she goes to the boys and she says, "I made these for you from my necklace." It was exceptionally impactful, because this is one of the pieces that she, prized, and she lost, I think. She ended up having to pawn, and then got back, right? That's how she kind of started her business in Miami. And so they knew how much it meant for her. So for her to have broken the necklace up and had it divided by a jeweler and manufactured and fashioned into necklaces for each of them, it was just a very, very meaningful. So of course we're like, oh, that's a beautiful scene. But then we realize, oh my gosh, how are we going to navigate this? Because we had already established the earrings. It needed to be believable that it was something that they couldn't be too giant, the stones, right? They couldn't be too tiny. They needed to be believable. She actually made what is it? I think 5 necklaces from one, because it was one for her and her 4 boys. And
Oh yeah,
so
that's true.
and we also needed to believe that it was something that could be worn by the boys as well as her. And it's almost like it needed to check all these boxes. And so I remembered that I'd been inspired by this beautiful necklace, actually worn by her amazing, her hairstylist. I'm sorry, but he's amazing. And so he had actually shown me the necklaces at the very beginning of the series. And I said, God, those are so beautiful. And he said, oh, I got them when I was traveling. He just had an amazing, he had been to so many different countries. And so he showed it to me and I said, oh, that's so beautiful. He said, oh, I got this from Colombia, actually. And I said, I've never seen a necklace like that. It was great because it was so elegant, but yet it was masculine. It was a lot of things. And so here I am, this had to have been, I swear, maybe 6 months later. And this came up relatively just a few months before we finished shooting. And that challenge was placed in front of me. And so I remembered his necklace and I texted him and said, Kelly.
Oh, so great. And it's perfect also that it was from Colombia.
Yeah. I mean, and he said, of course. And so he sent me the pictures and I said, yes, I remember it. And so that's when the R&D began. And one of my amazing assistant costume designers, Jenny Marlin, she's part of what, she's part of how it happened. We threw the net out to local jewelers and we really needed it turned around within a relatively tight time. And so we reached out and we did sketches. I did little sketches and sent them over back and forth. And we ended up creating the sort of like the main necklace that would at least echo and coordinate with the earrings, even though we knew they weren't going to be worn. They were originally scripted to just be sort of shown in a shop. And so at least the viewer would be able to have that as a record. We ended up not even needing to do that because it just worked organically. But yeah, and we had the smaller necklaces made. So it worked out great. And the scene was really beautiful. So
I know we have to wrap up, but a couple of questions I have for you. One, is there any talk of a tour, like perhaps that the costumes would go on a display somewhere where people can visit and look at it? Do you know of anything like that?
You know what? I'm not sure yet. I mean, I know that they are displaying some of the costumes at Netflix's For Your Consideration, I think, installation that they have for a number.
I didn't even know they did that.
Yeah, and it's at one of their studios. We just did a panel there. Actually, I did a panel there last week, and they have an installation for the gentleman, Ripley, Griselda, as well as the crown. And so I don't know if that will be traveling or if it will be moving and going to another location. I know that they set
like
up
LACMA. I think LACMA does something. Or FITM, exactly.
It would be great if they did, because
I think that'd be true.
Yeah.
The other thing briefly I wanted to mention is I just happened to catch this is a wonderful YouTube video of a timeline of Griselda's looks through. And was it every outfit she wore? Or was it just
every
a sampling?
Outfit, but it was I'd say it was about maybe 5 to 7 outfits from each episode. And the studio, we were just in discussions and they had selected which ones that we thought would work from, to kind of tell the story in a time lapse. And they had been inspired. It was a great idea, the home time lapse thing. And
I loved
so,
it.
yeah, so we just brought everything in because they're very good about keeping everything. And, had team, and you see me floating back and forth and dressing the mannequin and stepping back and looking at it. It was great. I think it was a lot of fun to put together.
Yeah, so I'm going to put a link to that in the
Oh,
description
great.
below. So if anybody wants to watch that,
Great.
also there was an article on the Tudum website, and if there's any other
Oh,
articles, Sophia is going
yeah.
to send those to me. But
Great.
also, what do you have coming up? Like you said, you did this a long time ago. What's in store
Yes,
for
I
you?
know. We did this a long time ago. I've done, I did Origin in Between. That's something that was a big, big project and took up a great deal of my time. And that's something that I actually did supervise. We went overseas. It went to Berlin. It was a big project. And I do have something that I'm prepping and we're about to prep, but I don't want to jinx it. I don't want to
Sure.
put
No,
it
no,
out there
I
yet.
totally.
So, but yeah, so I'm excited about. It's something in the pipeline that's exciting. So,
Okay, well, maybe
yeah,
if you'll let me know and you could come back and we could talk
absolutely.
about whatever that is. Wonderful.
Yeah, I would love to. It's been lovely talking to you, Heidi.
Oh, it's
You're
been
just
amazing. And
great.
I know you are on Instagram. You're not super active on Instagram, but
No, I'm
are you
not
on
trying to be.
that's totally fine. But what I will do is I will put a link to your IMDb if anybody wants to check it
Okay.
out, or your Instagram.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one more question before we go though.
Yes.
Of do you prefer 70s or 80s?
I'm gonna say I'm an 80s kid, so I'm gonna say 80s. I love the
Yeah.
70s too. It's hard to say, but I do love the 80s.
Yeah,
So
they're both really good. And and one more
thank
thing.
you.
Do you have a favorite
Yes.
costume from the show, or do you or is that too hard for you to choose?
Oh God. You know what? I'm gonna go with that the green dress, the teal dress, because
Sure.
yeah, that's one of my.
Oops,
There's a
sorry, not
lot of
there.
favorite
Word.
outfits, but
Yeah.
I'd
Sorry.
say go back one more. Yeah, that
She's so
that
sassy.
one. Yeah, and it
Look
just
how
it
sassy
just
she
was
is.
great.
I love to see what
And
the shoes look like. I can't recall what they were.
they were Escada slingbacks. They were, I don't know if you can really tell in the picture.
Yeah.
The illustration, I decided not to sort of,
Sure.
but I'm trying to think. But you know what? Now that I'm looking at these, if we're specifically looking at the illustrations, there's a lot of favorites, even just on that
It's
one
so
board.
hard.
I mean, I do have to say, this is what I will say. And I know we have to tie things together, but I did like that white lace dress. And,
Oh yeah.
we decided to go, it was scripted that she was supposed to walk in with the fur coat on it. And first she wasn't
Yeah.
supposed to sort of open up seated. It was like she was going to walk in. And as you see, you can kind of see the fur coat is behind her.
Yes.
That outfit together combined with it was one of my favorites. But I
Yeah.
love the party dress. It also,
Oh, for sure.
it really,
The one thing I
it
was
was
going
a
to
good
mention,
sport. We put it through a lot.
there's one thing that I really loved that you probably don't get comments on is I thought her foundation garments were amazing. Like her bras, all of
Yeah,
her nightgowns and stuff. She
yeah,
looks so everything fit her so beautifully. Like I just
yeah,
did a review of another show and I won't mention it on here.
yeah,
And I was like, what is with all the weird shaped, ill-fitting bras? But her bras were like so perfect on her. And as someone
yeah.
like myself who's busty, I was so
Yes.
delighted to see that.
Well, I can give you, I have that link for her bra. And I will say this, like, it was very important to
Mhm.
have the appropriate foundation for each period, and specifically for the 70s, because it was about no padding, no foam,
Mhm.
no molded cup. It was about that teardrop quality to the unlined bust, unlined breast. And that's what made the wrap dresses look so beautiful too, is
Oh,
that
yeah.
you really felt like there wasn't that foundation that was holding everything up, and it gave it a sinewy, lithe, and organic quality to
Mm.
even just the movement. And it worked beautifully with the jersey dresses, and it also worked with the 80s pieces.
Yeah, and then
But
some
yeah,
and
a
then some of
lot
the
of work
girls
went into that.
obviously some of the characters didn't wear bras at all, which was, obviously
Exactly.
was very period
As they,
correct
yeah,
too.
yeah.
So it just
Unless they were
felt
smuggling
so
cocaine.
authentic. But I was so
No,
delighted
it
to see
really
that. I was
was.
like, oh my God, Sophia is so beautifully like,
Yeah,
yeah,
that was something that we even tested out to find the right
mm.
one, and she also, Sophia's exceptional in every way, but she
So I
also
just wanted
really
to let you know
knows her body,
I
so
noticed those things. I appreciated
thank
those
you.
things.
Thank you, Heidi, I
Well,
appreciate it
thank
so
you,
much.
Shua. And hopefully I have your name right now. So, well, I
Yes, you
want to
do,
thank you so much.
Safua,
Yeah,
it's a tricky
it's
one,
such a
so
pleasure. And I'm really glad that we got to do this. And I would love to have you back when you have your new show, which we won't
I would
jinx
love
because,
I would love to be
yeah.
back. I'd love to come
Okay.
back.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much. And for everyone who's watching this, I really appreciate you spending time with us. So take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.